I probably won't be the first or last person to tell you that the original Pokemon Diamond and Pearl are pretty terrible games, but when hearing about why they're terrible, most people just settle for because Platinum is better in every way as their answer. And I'm not exactly here to defend against those allegations because they're all completely true, dear God. Instead, I'm here to tell you that those problems run much deeper than you might expect. And the only reason I know this is because I'm a speedrunner who has to deal with the deeper shortcomings this game has compared to Platinum. So with all that said, why would anyone want to speedrun Pokemon Diamond and Pearl if Platinum exists? Well, it's complicated. When it comes to the most minor of differences between Pokemon games and their definitive version, it can be hard to see how those little changes affect gameplay when most of them are pretty subtle when the games are played casually. But when it comes to speedrunning, these type of tiny changes put into a definitive version can have quite a drastic effect on a speedrun route. As an example, Pokemon Sun and Moon use Poplio the entire game, while Ultra Sun and Moon use Hawlucha. The reason for such a drastic change in routes is due to Ultra Moon providing you with a Hawlucha as a trade Pokemon before the first trial. This same exact trade technically also exists in Pokemon Sun and Moon, but you're given a Machop instead, which is nowhere near as good as Hawlucha for speedrunning. And it's very minor changes such as this that make up a solid reason to speedrun Pokemon Diamond and Pearl over Platinum. In total, there are about 5 of these positive minor differences, such as placing a TM in a different spot, a small location change for grabbing an HM, the layouts used for gyms, a couple of glitches, and finally, the Pokemon that your opponent has access to. The TM in question is one you can receive as soon as you enter Jubilife, and all you have to do to get it is to beat these 2 Abra trainers in the school building, and you'll get the TM for Hidden Power. In Generation 4 games, both this move's base power and type are affected by Pokemon's IVs, giving you extra coverage needed to play the game faster since we can manipulate those IVs very easily. And while it is an extra TM available in both games, Platinum locks this move behind the game corner, making it not worth grabbing at all for a speedrun since slot machines are really slow. But why is this TM such a big deal? Well, it actually makes Chimchar the undisputed fastest Pokemon in Diamond and Pearl. But Platinum has a bit of a starter war going on for the unanimously best Pokemon without access to that TM. While it is generally agreed upon that Piplup is the best and fastest starter for a Pokemon Platinum glitchless speedrun, Chimchar has had a stranglehold on the world record for quite a few years now due to how much more consistent using it actually is. And this is just pure speculation, but with Hidden Power taken into account, Chimchar would likely leave Piplup in the dust here too. The next minor change we need to cover is the HM location for the move Defog in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. For those unaware, Route 210 is a mandatory route filled with a ton of fog in the overworld, which also has the effect of lowering accuracy of moves in battle by 3/5 of their normal accuracy, which essentially comes down to about a 60% chance of hitting a 100% accurate move, which is pretty terrible to deal with and overall worth getting rid of the fog in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. Platinum, on the other hand, decided to move this HM from the easily accessible Great Marsh and place it deep within the Solaceon ruins. And if memory serves, this wastes about a minute of time saved to obtain in Platinum, making it not worth the investment and forcing us to take some pretty painful risk in the deep fog. For the third minor difference, we're coming up on the gym layouts. Gardenia, Maylene, Fantina, and Candace all have very vastly different gym layouts in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl as opposed to Platinum. Some of these layouts force you to fight extra trainers in Diamond and Pearl, while others are either really weird, easy to solve puzzles that lead directly to the gym leader, or quite a headache to solve if most of your Gen 4 experience lies within Platinum, making gym layouts a bit of a mixed bag, unfortunately. But what isn't a mixed bag whatsoever is the differences in glitches between Pokemon Diamond versus Platinum. The key changes here involve how collision is programmed in what's known as the Void. This is essentially an area in the game that shouldn't really exist, but when you go over a loading zone fast enough by following a set pattern, you can just force it to exist through a glitch called tweaking. Given that bike speeds between Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum are very similar, and the loading zone in those cities are exactly the same, you can technically do the same glitches in both games. But because of that newly programmed Void collision in Platinum, they won't actually have the same results when doing those glitches. As an example, beating Diamond and Pearl in under an hour is super super possible with only 2 badges to your name, all thanks to this particular tweak that can take us all the way to the Hall of Fame if we save and reset in very specific spots in the void. Platinum, however, can't even make it far enough before the collision destroys that opportunity. However, I think this is actually a fantastic change for Platinum, since it provides Platinum with an entirely new route for speedrunning. But where one of the wilder changes happens is in the Pokemon that trainers have going from Platinum to Diamond and Pearl. I'm sure if you've been on the internet long enough, you'll know about the infamous 2-Fire Pokemon team that the Fire Elite Four member Flint has. But have you ever looked at the gym leaders and Team Galactic lineup in Diamond and Pearl? It's pretty terrible. Most of the early sections have you facing monstrosities such as Cascoon, Wurmple, Bronzor. It's just not great. Even your boy Cyrus doesn't have fully evolved Pokemon when you face him in his very own Team Plasma headquarters. Gym leaders are also pretty pathetic and weird. Most of them have very under-evolved Pokemon that don't pose much of a challenge. But then there's folks like Volkner, the electric gym leader. I'm trying to contemplate why they gave this guy an Octillery and an Ambipom, but I can't make this up. It's so weird. I truly have no idea the logic behind these battle team decisions, but it makes it feel as if the games were rushed out without full thought being put into balancing or the common gym and Elite Four tropes, such as having monotype teams throughout their party of 6. But at the very least, this emphasis on weaker and weirder teammates does make the speedrun a bit more consistent than Platinum. And if you're looking for difficulty, Cynthia does have most of her classic team going on, but unfortunately there's an even deeper problem with Cynthia and every single trainer thus far that you might not have known about. But before we talk about those issues, I just want to say thanks for watching this far into the video, and if you're enjoying this enough, please consider subscribing. We're right on the cusp of 100,000 subscribers, to the point where we might actually reach it by the end of the year. So now that we're finished talking about why you would even consider running Diamond and Pearl, we obviously have to talk about the much deeper issues of the games to understand why a lot of folks tend to avoid speedrunning it. Let's start this rough side of Diamond and Pearl with one of the biggest culprits being the AI on every single trainer in the game. I'm not entirely sure if this was due to a time crunch or wanting to make the games easier, but even trainers such as the champion Cynthia are programmed to go for a randomly selected move as long as that move doesn't conflict with a very special set of circumstances, like trying to poison a poison type Pokemon, burn a fire type Pokemon, or status a Pokemon already going through a status ailment. I might be missing an edge case here or there with the AI, but either way, this was arguably a worse decision than the swim speed. It does, however, present the opportunity to play as risky as possible, since you could technically play the entire game with 1 HP as long as you can either KO your opponent before they KO you, or they have a single non-damaging move in their inventory. However, this is only one of 5 major issues with running this game that make it really awkward to even consider speedrunning, because the next one has to tie back in with the battle system. You ever wonder why folks always bring up the battle speed in Generation 4 games? Well, there's a good reason for that, and it's not a very obvious one. You see, it's not just psychologically slow, because there's actually a weird hiccup of dead air that happens each time you take or receive damage. But if we mash buttons during those dead air segments, it actually causes the game to move forward a bit faster. The 3rd out of 5 nails in the coffin for this game also happens to take place in the battle system, because Diamond and Pearl treat their battle system very differently from other Gen 4 games, but not in the good kind of different. Generally, you can force the exact same results in battle when you start up a fight at a similar time frame in other Generation 4 games. But Diamond and Pearl, for some reason, advances RNG mid-battles in ways where you won't get that perfect sequence of events in a row without being extremely precise. Because of this, obtaining key features that make battles easier, such as Pokerus, are not very feasible to manipulate, whereas every other Gen 4 game gets it by just entering and exiting a battle after a very long string of precise movement. Now, while this type of manipulation can get pretty cheesy at times, I have to say I'm extremely glad they ended up changing it later on. But one of the other things that I'm thankful for is the gym order change in Pokemon Platinum. If you've played enough Generation 4 Pokemon games, you're probably used to this order of events. But for Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, the Hearthome City Gym is placed in the 5th gym slot instead of the 3rd, even though we pass through the city extremely early on. This isn't exactly the biggest deal ever, but it does mean we have less experience to earn before Wake's gym. Under normal circumstances, this would mean we'd have to face Wake with a not fully evolved Monferno. But fortunately for modern day speedruns, we have strategies to counteract this by stealing a Lucky Egg from a Chansey via RNG manipulation. But it does add a somewhat rough barrier to entry when performing a speedrun. But for the final nail in the coffin, we're gonna have to dig through Pokemon Platinum's 80% glitchless speedrun route history. Throughout the past decade of speedrunning Pokemon Platinum, speedrunners have taken the glitchless run down above 4 hours to times super close to 3 hours and 30 minutes flat. Most of those runs were done with Piplup throughout the decade until someone hypothetically asked, what if we tried Chimchar instead? Well, this purely theoretical question was asked by none other than a speedrunner who goes by the username Crafted. Crafted is very well known in the community for their insane consistency, Pokemon knowledge, and for putting Chimchar back on the map as the king of Pokemon Platinum speedruns, and all likely stemmed from a massive distaste for using Piplup as the main mon in Platinum. While Piplup's final evolution is an incredible Pokemon, Piplup and Prinplup are very sorely lacking in the move pool and power department when it comes to getting runs off the ground with how much has to go right in each battle early on. This stretch of disgusting battles stretches from Gym 1 all the way past Gym 3 without much breathing room until you finally evolve Piplup into Empoleon. And with such a massive stretch of nastiness going against Piplup, it can be extremely mentally taxing never getting a run off the ground. So with Crafted likely fed up with Piplup, he eventually invented a similar strategy to the one that speedrunners had been using in Diamond and Pearl for years, the Lucky Egg RNG manipulation. With this newfound power, Chimchar now had enough wiggle room to compete in a much more fun and consistent way for the world record. And while Piplup did snag the world record back at least once, it didn't take long for Chimchar to regain dominance throughout the past 3 years. But one thing that didn't change is the active attempts at beating the glitchless world record in Diamond and Pearl. I imagine you might be thinking, what does all this have to do with Diamond and Pearl speedrunning? And what could have actually caused the downfall of it in the long run? Well, once the invention of a Chimchar route began to be a very competitive thing in Pokemon Platinum, no one really had a good reason to go back to glitchless speedruns in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl when you could just play the better game. Why deal with messy AI, no Pokerus, or an objectively worse version of a game when Pokemon Platinum exists? Well, there's only really 2 reasons I could come up with. One, how fast could you beat Diamond and Pearl if you took every possible risk? While Crafted does have a solid world record on the boards, it's definitely a beatable run, especially if you really push this high risk, high reward mentality against the garbage AI. The final reason is because the glitch speedruns of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl are really unique and cool compared to Platinum, and could easily net in more fun side categories if folks were inspired enough to invent something. Something I think would be cool is a glitch catch-em-all where you ride all over the void until you complete the entire Pokedex, or even a run that grabs all the badges with just using glitches. Truly, I think the possibilities are endless, and I think Diamond and Pearl deserves better than to be written off as an inferior version of Platinum, at least to a degree. Like seriously, what were they thinking with this artillery on the electric